The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows over the freshly mowed lawns of Crestwood Estates. It was the kind of neighborhood where every house gleamed with freshly painted shutters and every mailbox stood at perfect attention. To an outsider, it looked like the American dream distilled into a tidy suburban block. For Sergeant Mike Reynolds, recently retired and now a single father, Crestwood Estates seemed like the perfect place to start fresh. His teenage son, James, was the light of his life, a brilliant kid, bound to a wheelchair after an accident years ago. Mike had made sure this house was accessible, with ramps and widened doorways, so James could navigate independently. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Mike parked the truck in the driveway, feeling a rare flicker of calm as James rolled out onto the porch. The boy's smile was wide, his eyes sparkling despite the day's exhaustion. "Looks good, Dad," James said, his voice warm but tired. Mike returned the smile but couldn't shake the unease gnawing at the edges of his mind. The neighbors seemed friendly enough, waving as they mowed lawns or walked dogs, but there was something in the way the neighborhood's HOA signs glinted in the fading light. Rules were the currency here. Rules that didn't leave much room for exception. That evening, as Mike unpacked boxes, a sharp knock startled them both. Mike opened the door to find a woman standing there, clipboard in hand, her face set in a tight, calculating expression. "Good evening," she said, her tone crisp and formal. "I'm Karen Whitman, HOA board member. Welcome to Crestwood Estates." Mike nodded, extending a hand, but she barely glanced at it. Her eyes immediately flicked to the wheelchair ramp that James had taken great care to use with independence. "I noticed the ramp you installed," Karen said, voice smooth but cold. "It wasn't approved by the HOA." Mike blinked, confused. "It's for my son. He needs it." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. "We understand, but all modifications require prior approval. You should have submitted an application." James, sensing the tension, rolled forward. "It helps me get around," he said quietly. Karen's eyes flicked over him briefly, then back to Mike. "Rules are rules. I'm sure you'll rectify this soon." With that, she turned on her heel and strode away, leaving a chill in the evening air. Mike closed the door, heart pounding. He knew HOA rules could be strict, but Karen's tone felt like more than bureaucracy. It felt like a challenge. That night, Mike lay awake, listening to the soft hum of the air conditioner and the occasional creak of settling wood. He thought about James, how hard his son fought every day just to live fully, and wondered how this fight was about to change everything. Outside, lights flickered in neighboring windows. Somewhere across the street, a curtain twitched. Mike had a sinking feeling that Karen's watchful eyes weren't done with them yet. As the moon rose, casting silver light over the pristine lawns, Mike made a silent promise. Whatever Karen's game was, he'd face it head on. After all, he was a drill sergeant, trained to stand firm in the face of pressure. And this fight? It was personal. The next morning, Mike tried to shake off the unease that had settled like a weight on his chest. He hoped the previous night's encounter with Karen Whitman was a simple misunderstanding, a procedural oversight that could be fixed with paperwork. But as he stepped outside, a crisp white envelope pinned to his front door with a neat, cold precision told him otherwise. He peeled it open, his fingers tightening around the edges. Inside was a formal letter from the HOA, a violation notice citing the unauthorized wheelchair ramp. It stated he had 30 days to remove it or face escalating fines and possible legal action. Mike's jaw clenched as James approached, reading, over his shoulder. "They want to take it away?" The boy's voice trembled, barely holding back tears. "No," Mike said firmly, pulling James into a quick hug. Not without a fight. That evening, the neighborhood HOA meeting was packed. The air inside the community center buzzed with quiet conversations and cautious glances. Mike's arrival was met with a mixture of nods and thinly veiled suspicion. When Karen took the floor, her voice was icy but practiced. "We have rules to maintain the appearance and safety of our community. Mr. Reynolds's ramp violates these guidelines." She paused, then added pointedly, "Exceptions set precedents." Mike stood, calm but resolute. "My son's safety and independence depend on that ramp. It's not a luxury, it's a necessity." His voice carried the authority of a man used to being heard, but the room was divided. Karen smiled thinly. Rules don't bend for sentiment. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Some neighbors nodded in agreement, others shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between Mike and Karen. The tension thickened when an older woman raised her hand. "Isn't there a way to compromise? Surely the HOA can make exceptions for disabilities?" Karen's glare silenced the room. "This is not up for debate." Mike sensed the room's mood shifting against him. It wasn't just about rules, it was personal for Karen. Why? Later, as Mike helped James inside, a car slowed in front of their home. The window rolled down, and a voice hissed low and threatening, "Back off, or things will get worse." Mike's military instincts kicked in immediately. Who was watching? Who wanted to intimidate them? That night, Mike sat by James's bedside, watching his son sleep. The ramp was more than a piece of wood. It was James's lifeline. He couldn't let fear win. The father knew this fight would test every ounce of his strength and patience. Karen wasn't just enforcing rules. She was attacking their right to live with dignity, and Mike was ready. The days following the HOA meeting were a whirlwind of hushed conversations and suspicious glances. Mike felt the neighborhood's atmosphere shift. What once seemed welcoming had turned prickly, like a delicate web woven tight around him, and James, every glance from behind curtains felt like a judgment. The line between friend and foe blurred, and Mike couldn't tell who truly stood with them. That Saturday morning, Mike wheeled James out onto the front porch. The ramp was a small beacon of freedom for his son, but even that simple act felt like a challenge under the watchful eyes of their neighbors. As James adjusted his cap, Mike noticed Mrs. Daniels, an elderly widow who lived 2 doors down, slowly approaching. Her face was soft but lined with worry. "I think what Karen's doing is wrong," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "I saw how James struggles. You have my support, Mike." Relief bloomed inside him, but it was fragile. "Thanks, Mrs. Daniels, that means a lot, but not all neighbors were so kind." Later that afternoon, as Mike loaded groceries into the house, a group of homeowners gathered by a freshly trimmed hedge. He caught Karen among them, her voice low but sharp as she outlined new ways to maintain neighborhood standards. Mike's heart pounded. She was rallying support, turning neighbors into soldiers in her campaign. The stakes were growing higher. That evening, Mike scoured HOA bylaws online, searching for any loopholes or clauses about disability accommodations. The more he read, the clearer it became. Karen was exploiting vague wording to push her agenda. Determined, Mike decided to meet with the HOA board outside of the regular meetings. He sent an email requesting a private discussion, hoping to find reason or allies before things spiraled further. The response was swift and curt, a flat refusal. The board preferred to handle matters officially. The message was clear. They sided with Karen, or at least feared her enough not to challenge her openly. Frustration simmered, but Mike's drill sergeant training reminded him to remain composed. This wasn't just about a ramp anymore. It was about dignity, fairness, and fighting back against a system rigged against them. Late that week, a new worry surfaced. James confided quietly, "Dad, I think Karen's been leaving notes on my bike. Mean ones." Mike's blood ran cold. Notes with cruel messages, some threatening, others mocking. The intimidation wasn't just official anymore. It had become personal harassment. Mike's protective instincts flared. He installed a small security camera by the ramp and began documenting everything. Notes, encounters, suspicious behavior. Every moment counted. One night, as Mike reviewed footage, the camera caught Karen herself, lurking near the ramp after dark, glancing around before slipping away. The coldness in her eyes sent a chill deeper than the night air. Mike knew then. This wasn't just a rule enforcement, it was a vendetta. But why? What fueled Karen's relentless crusade against them? The question haunted him. And as the neighborhood held its breath, Mike realized the fight was far from over. He was alone in the spotlight, with Karen pulling strings from the shadows. But one thing was certain, Mike was ready. He wasn't just a father protecting his son, he was a drill sergeant trained to face the enemy head-on. And Karen had just awakened a force she couldn't control. The morning air was crisp, but the chill Mike felt went far deeper than the early spring breeze. Since the last HOA meeting, things had escalated in ways he hadn't anticipated. The Pole, neighborhood that once felt like a refuge, now seemed like a cage closing in, and Karen was the architect of its iron bars. As Mike left the house, he spotted a cluster of new, official-looking notices plastered on the community bulletin board. They weren't just about the ramp anymore. There were warnings about unapproved exterior modifications, penalties for rule violations, and thinly veiled references to community integrity. Karen's fingerprints were everywhere. Mike's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Back off, or things get worse. His jaw tightened. Threats now. The subtle intimidation had morphed into something more sinister. He showed the text to James, who swallowed hard but nodded bravely. We can't let her win. Dad, Mike agreed, but he also knew that raw courage wasn't enough. This was a battle requiring strategy, and he was the drill sergeant who knew how to plan for war. He began documenting everything meticulously, every letter, every note, every suspicious visit. He installed more cameras, checking the footage, daily for anything unusual. The community's quiet hostility had become an open war zone in slow motion. One afternoon, Mike received a visit from an unfamiliar man in a dark suit. The man introduced himself as a community mediator sent by the HOA to resolve disputes. But Mike's instincts screamed caution. The mediator's tone was polite, but his words were veiled threats. Mr. Reynolds, it would be in everyone's best interest to comply with the HOA's requests. Prolonged conflict only harms the community's reputation and its residents. Mike held his ground, unwavering. My son's safety and dignity are not up for negotiation. The mediator smiled thinly. Sometimes the appearance of harmony requires difficult sacrifices. Mike watched the man leave, knowing this was no ordinary negotiation. It was an attempt to break his will. That night, Mike gathered his few closest allies, Mrs. Daniels, the kindly neighbor who had quietly voiced support, and a young couple who had seen Karen's harsh tactics firsthand. Together they planned a discreet neighborhood meeting, away from the prying eyes of the HOA board. This isn't just about rules anymore, Mike told them firmly. It's about standing up to bullying. If Karen thinks she can push us around, she's wrong. The group agreed to start collecting signatures demanding a fair hearing, greater transparency, and a review of the ramp issue specifically. It was a small, risky rebellion, but it was a start. As the days passed, the neighborhood's tension tightened like a noose. Karen's presence was felt everywhere, in whispered conversations, in furtive glances, in the cold treatment Mike and James received. But Mike refused to back down. The father's resolve burned brighter with every threat, every attempt to isolate them. One evening, Mike noticed fresh tire tracks near the ramp, a subtle but clear warning. Someone had come. Close enough to send a message. His protective instincts surged. He checked the cameras again, and there, caught in the grainy footage, was a shadow moving slowly, deliberately, near the ramp. The figure paused, then vanished into the night. Mike's heart pounded. Karen's attacks were no longer just about paperwork. They had crossed into intimidation, harassment. But the drill sergeant in him wasn't shaken. Instead, he tightened his grip on the fight. "This ends," Mike vowed silently. "And it ends on my terms." Mike Reynolds had never backed down from a fight, whether on the battlefield or in civilian life. But this was different. The enemy was invisible, wielding HOA bylaws as weapons and neighborhood gossip as ammunition. Still, the drill sergeant in him wasn't about to surrender. He began his counterattack with military precision. Every detail was documented. The ramp's construction plans, medical records proving James's need, photos showing the safety and accessibility it provided. He contacted disability rights organizations, gathering advice and legal counsel. Each evening, Mike reviewed every piece of information, crafting a case so airtight it would be impossible to ignore or dismiss. This wasn't just about a ramp anymore. It was a battle for respect, fairness, and basic human dignity. At the next HOA board meeting, the atmosphere was electric. Neighbors packed the room, eyes flickering between Mike and Karen like a powder keg waiting to explode. Karen took the floor first, her voice cold and clipped. "Mr. Reynolds has blatantly disregarded the community's rules. Allowing such exceptions threatens the uniformity and values we uphold." Mike rose, his voice steady and commanding. "This isn't about uniformity. It's about humanity." He laid out his evidence methodically, highlighting the ADA guidelines, the importance of the ramp for James's independence, and the emotional toll Karen's actions had inflicted on his family. The room fell silent. Some neighbors shifted uncomfortably, others exchanged glances. Mike's presence filled the space, calm, resolute, impossible to ignore. Karen's expression flickered, her usual icy confidence slipping for a moment. "Rules exist for a reason," she countered, but her words now sounded defensive, strained. Then Mike dropped the next truth bomb. "Karen's vendetta isn't just about rules. It's personal." Murmurs spread like wildfire. Karen's eyes narrowed dangerously. Mike wasn't finished. "I know about her past. The incident she's trying to hide. The one that fuels this vendetta against my family." The room held its breath. Karen's face drained of color. Mike's words hung in the air like a challenge. Karen opened her mouth, then closed it again. For the first time, she looked vulnerable. The board chair called for order, trying to steer the meeting back on course. But the damage was done. Karen's carefully constructed image had cracked. Mike's allies stepped forward, neighbors who had quietly supported him from the start. One by one, they spoke up, sharing stories of Karen's harshness, her inflexibility, and the unnecessary suffering her actions caused. The tide was turning. Karen's campaign of intimidation was unraveling before their eyes. But Mike knew better than to celebrate prematurely. She was a fierce opponent, and the war was far from over. As the meeting ended, Karen shot Mike a cold glare. "This isn't finished," she warned, voice low but venomous. Mike met her gaze evenly. "It is for me, because I'm not fighting alone anymore." Walking out, surrounded by neighbors who now whispered words of encouragement, Mike felt a surge of hope. The battle had shifted, and this time, he was leading the charge. After the explosive HOA meeting, Mike could feel the neighborhood shifting beneath his feet. What had once been quiet hostility was now charged with uncertainty. Karen's icy grip on the community was loosening, but she wasn't defeated. Not yet. Mike spent the next few days digging deeper into Karen's background. What was this incident he'd hinted at? The answer might explain why she was so relentlessly targeting his family. With the help of Mrs. Daniels and the young couple who had stood by him, Mike started piecing together whispers from neighbors and public records. The fragments formed a troubling picture. Years ago, Karen had been involved in a serious legal dispute involving her previous home, a case marked by allegations of harassment and intimidation toward a disabled neighbor. The community had quietly moved past it, but the scars lingered. Mike realized Karen's crusade against his son's ramp wasn't just about rules. It was personal vengeance wrapped in authority. She saw James as a threat to her control, a reminder of the past she wanted to bury. Armed with this knowledge, Mike reached out to a local disability rights advocate who agreed to speak at the next HOA meeting. Together, they planned to confront Karen's bullying with facts and legal clarity. Meanwhile, Mike's own circle of support grew. More neighbors came forward, emboldened by Mike's courage and the growing evidence of Karen's vendetta. They signed petitions demanding the HOA recognize the legality and necessity of James's ramp, calling for greater inclusivity and compassion in community governance. But Karen wasn't silent. She sent another chilling message. A sharply worded letter threatening legal action against Mike and his allies for defamation and harassment. The letter was intimidating, but Mike remained unshaken. One evening, as Mike reviewed the letter, James looked up from his wheelchair. "Dad, they think they can scare us." Mike smiled, pride swelling in his chest. "They're wrong, son. We're stronger than they think." Days later, the community center buzzed with anticipation. The meeting was packed beyond capacity, neighbors eager to witness the showdown. When Karen spoke, she tried to maintain her composure, but the weight of her past and the mounting opposition made her falter. The disability advocate presented legal facts, referencing ADA protections and the rights of residents with disabilities. The board members listened, some visibly uncomfortable. Mike stood again and addressed the crowd. "This fight is about more than a ramp. It's about respect, dignity, and community. We can't let fear and prejudice decide who belongs here." The energy in the room shifted. Karen's supporters quieted, and those who had remained silent began to nod in agreement. The HOA board announced a temporary suspension of any enforcement actions against Mike while they reviewed the policies in light of the new information. As Mike wheeled James out into the warm evening air, a sense of victory, tentative but real, settled over them. But Mike knew this was only one battle won. Karen's fire was fierce, and the war for their right to live peacefully in Crestwood Estates was far from over. The temporary truce felt fragile, like a thin sheet of ice barely holding under the weight of what lay ahead. Mike knew Karen's threats weren't empty. They were the calm before a storm. Within days of the HOA's announcement, subtle sabotage began. Mike discovered his mailbox vandalized, splattered with paint, and a tire slashed on his truck. The message was clear. Karen's allies were still active, lurking in the shadows. Mike tightened security around his home, installing lights and cameras at every corner. He also organized a neighborhood watch with his allies, determined to protect not just his family, but anyone who dared stand up to the oppressive HOA regime. One evening, as Mike reviewed the footage from the front porch camera, a figure darted across the yard, too fast to catch clearly. The silhouette was familiar, Karen. But this time, she wasn't alone. Behind her, another shadow lingered, a man Mike didn't recognize, someone new, someone dangerous. Mike's instincts screamed warning bells. He began asking discreet questions. Around the neighborhood, piecing together whispers about a mysterious consultant hired by the HOA board, someone with a reputation for aggressive tactics and legal muscle. The battle lines had been drawn wider than Mike realized. It wasn't just Karen anymore. It was a coordinated effort to crush dissent. That weekend, Mike received a threatening phone call, voice distorted but cold and unmistakably determined. "Step down, or we make your life a nightmare." Mike's response was calm but fierce. "You picked the wrong family." With every attack, Mike grew more resolute. He started training James in self-defense adapted to his abilities, teaching him that strength came not just from muscle, but from mind and heart. Meanwhile, the neighborhood watch uncovered evidence of tampering with community facilities, prank-like but clearly intended to scare and disrupt. Mike shared the findings with local authorities, insisting on a full investigation. Public attention began to turn toward Crestwood Estates. Local news outlets caught wind of the story, portraying Mike and James as a family standing up to bullying and injustice. Karen's efforts to suppress the ramp and silence dissenters were no longer hidden in shadows. Faced with mounting pressure, the HOA board hesitated, and cracks appeared in their united front. Some members privately expressed discomfort with Karen's methods, fearing legal consequences and reputational damage. Mike sensed the tide turning again, but he also understood the final battle was looming. One night, James woke Mike suddenly. "Dad, I heard voices outside." Mike grabbed his flashlight and went to the window. Shadows moved near the ramp, figures whispering, plotting. He knew this was it. The moment when words and meetings would no longer be enough. The battle for their home, their dignity, and their future was about to reach a dangerous climax. But Mike was ready. More than ready. He was a drill sergeant, and he would fight to the end. The night air was heavy with tension, the shadows cast by the porch light twisting into ominous shapes. Mike's heart pounded as he gripped his flashlight tighter, eyes scanning. The yard where whispers had stirred his son awake. Outside, voices were hushed but urgent. Someone was near the ramp. Mike's drill sergeant instincts kicked into overdrive. This was no ordinary intimidation anymore. This was a direct threat. He wheeled James behind him, quietly reaching for his phone to call the local police. But before he could, the front door creaked open. Karen stepped into the light, flanked by the mysterious man Mike had spotted weeks earlier. The man's face was hard to read, a lawyer or enforcer, perhaps, hired to intimidate. Karen's voice was cold, but tinged with something. New hesitation. "This ends tonight, Reynolds. Remove the ramp or we'll take legal action you can't fight." Mike's gaze hardened. "You want a fight? You got one." Just then, a flurry of headlights illuminated the street. Police cars arrived, alerted by Mike's earlier calls and the neighborhood watch's vigilance. Officers stepped out, scanning the yard. Karen's expression shifted from defiant to wary. The officers calmly informed Karen and her companion that they had received multiple complaints about harassment and vandalism linked to the HOA's campaign against Mike's family. There was an ongoing investigation into these incidents. Suddenly, Karen's plan began to unravel, but the biggest surprise came moments later. Mrs. Daniels, the quiet widow who had supported Mike from the start, stepped forward with a folder of documents. She revealed that several neighbors had secretly recorded Karen's bullying tactics over the years, and that a coalition had formed to demand the HOA's reform. Karen's icy facade cracked further as her allies silently turned away. Mike's voice echoed with calm authority. "This community belongs to all of us, not just those who seek control through fear." The HOA board was forced to convene an emergency meeting. Under public scrutiny and legal pressure, they voted unanimously to withdraw all actions against Mike's ramp and to implement new policies, protecting residents with disabilities. Karen resigned from the board that very night, her reign over the neighborhood broken. In the days that followed, the community came together in an unexpected display of unity. Barriers that had divided them melted as neighbors reached out, helping James adjust to the ramp and showing genuine care. Mike watched his son roll freely across the porch, the smile on James's face a reward greater than any victory. But the final twist came quietly. One afternoon, as Mike sorted through mail, he found a letter from Karen, No threats this time, just an apology. She admitted her actions had been fueled by fear and past wounds she hadn't faced. Mike's reply was, simple, forgiveness isn't weakness. It's strength. As the sun set over Crestwood Estates, Mike knew the fight had changed them all. Not just a victory for his son, but a turning point for the entire neighborhood. And though the scars remained, so did hope. Because sometimes the fiercest battles lead to the strongest communities.